Hi and Assalamualaikum semua. So today we will continue chapter 9, which is planning for contingencies. So for this chapter, there are 7 subtopics that will be covered. First, we will look at introduction to contingency planning, incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, crisis management, business resumption, and lastly, testing contingency plan. Now let's start on the first topic, which is introduction to contingency planning. So basically, this chapter focuses on planning for unexpected adverse events when the use of technology is disrupted and business operations can come to a standstill. Can you imagine when we are very relying on internet and there is something happen that makes the internet shut down and you can't even access to your personal details on the internet, so it will make it much difficult for everyday and daily operations. An organization's ability to weather losses caused by an adverse event depends on proper planning and execution of such a plan, without which an adverse event can cause severe damage to an organization's information resources and assets from which it may never recover. Can you imagine kalau kita tak plan, something will happen. So kita tak ada terus how to react if this kind of thing happen. So we will need a very hard time to overcome this kind of problem. That's why all organizations need to have a disaster recovery planning program in order to anticipate if there is any disaster causes that can make losses of data information. Let's look at the fundamentals of contingency planning. As a definition, contingency planning is the overall planning for unexpected adverse events. It is how communities of interest position their organizational units to prepare for, detect, react to, and recover from events that threaten the security of information resources and assets. So what is the goal of contingency planning? It is to restore normal modes of operation with minimum cost and disruption to normal business activities after an unexpected adverse event. We want to make sure that if anything happens to the organization, when everything is become normal, it can be like before the event occur. Okay. The components of contingency planning policies involve an introductory statement by senior management, the scope and purpose of the CP operations, a call for periodic risk assessment, and BIA by the CPMT. BIA is Business Impact Analysis. We will discuss this later. CPMT is Contingency Planning Management Team. And then a description of the major components of CP, Contingency Planning, a call for and guidance in the selection of recovery options and business continuity strategies, a requirement to test the various plans on a regular basis, and lastly, components of contingency planning policy is identification of key regulations and standards of impact CP planning and a brief overview of their relevancy. This is the contingency planning hierarchies. Contingency planning must involve business impact analysis, and then it involves incident response planning, disaster recovery planning, business continuity planning, and also crisis management planning. So all organizations need to follow these contingency planning hierarchies in order to make sure that they can plan and create and also implement a good contingency plan. This is the contingency planning life cycle. So if the event occur, what you need to do first is to form the CP team, which they call CPMT. And then once they have formed the CP team, they will develop a policy statement, and then they will start with conducting the business impact analysis, determine mission, business process and recovery critically, identify resource requirements, identify recovery priorities for system resources. After conducting the BIA, they will form the subordinate planning teams from the incident response, disaster recovery, and also business continuity plan. And then once they have formed the subordinate for planning teams, they will develop subordinate planning policies and then integrate the business impact analysis and then identify preventive controls, organize response teams under these three planning, and then create the response strategy for each of the plan, develop subordinate plans, and then ensure plan testing, training and exercise, and lastly ensure the plan maintenance. So this contingency planning life cycle is continuously happen. So you need to make sure you maintain this contingency planning in order to make sure that if the same thing happen in future, the company can able to manage it properly. As discussed earlier, the components of contingency planning consist of four major components, which is business impact analysis, incident response plan, disaster recovery plan, and lastly business continuity plan. The component of contingency plan should start with the first one, which is business impact analysis first, and then once they settle with BIA, they can continue with IR, incident response, and then disaster recovery plan, and lastly business continuity plan. The first components of contingency planning is business impact analysis. The BIA begins with the prioritized list of threats and vulnerabilities identified in the risk management process and enhances the list by adding the information needed to respond to the adversity. When undertaking the BIA, the organization should consider the scope of business impact analysis and then plan, balance, objectives, and also follow up of the business impact. And then the CPMT, Contingency Plan Management Team, conducts the BIA in three stages. The first stage is determine mission or business processes and recovery critically. Once they have determined, they will identify the resource requirements, and lastly, they will identify recovery priorities for system resources. Now let's look at the contingency planning policies. Prior to the development of each of the types of CP documents outlined in this chapter, the CP team should work to develop the policy environment that will enable the BIA process and should provide specific policy guidance toward authorizing the creation of each of the planning components, which is the incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. These policies provide guidance on the structure of the subordinate teams and the philosophy of the organization, and they assist in the structuring of the contingency plan. Now let's move on to the next subtopic, which is incident response. Most organizations have experience detecting, reacting to, and recovering from attacks, employee errors, service outages, and small-scale natural disasters, and are thus performing incident response. IR must be carefully planned and coordinated because the organization heavily depends on the quick and efficient containment and resolution of incidents. Incident response planning (IRP) therefore is the preparation for such an effort and is performed by the IRP team. So when those events represent the potential for loss, they are referred to as adverse events or incident candidates, those who involve in the incidents. So when an adverse event begins to manifest as a real threat to information, it will become an incident. As part of an increased focus on cybersecurity infrastructure protection, NIST has developed a framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, also referred to as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So this cybersecurity framework relates to the NIST incident response life cycles. It starts with the preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication and recovery, and also post-event incident activity. The NIST cybersecurity framework starts with identify, protect, detect, respond, and also recover. Recover, tactical recovery phase, and also strategic recovery phase. The key components of a typical IR policy. If you want to create the IR policy, you need to make sure that you include statement of management commitment, purpose and objectives of the policy, scope of the policy, definition of InfoSec incidents and related terms, organizational structure and definition of roles, responsibilities and levels of authority, prioritization or severity ratings of incidents, performance measures, and also reporting and contact forms. When a threat becomes a valid adverse event, it is classified as an InfoSec incident. If it is directed against information assets, it has a realistic chance of success. If it threatens the confidentiality, integrity or availability of information resources and assets. So it is important to understand that IR is a reactive measure, not a preventive one, although most IR plans include preventative recommendations. The incident response planning includes mission of the plan, strategies and goals, senior management approval, organizational approach to incident response, how the incident response team will communicate, metrics for measuring incident response capability and effectiveness, roadmap for measuring incident response capability, and lastly, how the program fits into the overall organization. Means that if you want to create the incident response planning, these are the content that you need to include in the IR. For every incident scenario, the CP teams create 3 sets of incident handling procedure, which is during the incident, after the incident, and before the incident. Once these sets of procedures are clearly documented, the IR portion of the IR plan is assembled and the critical information outlined in this planning section is recorded. So figure 10-8 present an example of pages from the IR plan that support each of these phases. So before an attack, what are the things that you need to do? After an attack, what you need to do? And during an attack, what are the things that you need to do? Next is incident response action. How are you going to take action if this incident happen? Incident response action can be organized into 3 basic phases: detection, reaction, and recovery. During the detection phases, you recognize that an incident is underway. During the reaction phases, responding to the incident in a predetermined fashion to contain and mitigate its potential damage. And during the recovery phase, you return all systems and data to their state before the incident, going back to the normal situation. Detecting incidents. The challenge is determining whether an event is the product of routine system use or an actual incident. Incident classification is the process of examining an adverse event or incident candidate and determine whether it constitutes an actual incident. Initial reports from end-user intrusion detection system, host and network-based virus detection software and system administrators are all ways to track and detect incident candidates. Once an actual incident is properly identified and classified, members of the IR team can effectively execute the corresponding procedure from the IR plan. In order to make sure whether the incident is really happened, there are indicators that can help indicate the level of the incidents. The first one is possible indicators, and then probable indicators, definite indicators, and potential incident results. You can indicate it as a possible indicator if the presence of unfamiliar files. When you save a certain file in one document and then suddenly you find out that there are files that you have not saved it inside that folder, means that it is very mysteriously saved under your documents. So that can be a possible indicator. Probable indicators is if the activities at unexpected times. Definite indicators shows when there are a use of dormant accounts or changes of logs, and it can be presence of hacker tools, things that you are not familiar with, and potential incidents results indicator shows that there are a loss of availability. You have identified that your document is missing, okay, loss of integrity, other people can access to your password. That is the indicators that the incident is very serious. How to react to these incidents? There are several ways to react. First, notification of key personnel. You need to identify, you need to tell to the key personnel that there are incidents happen affecting to the security of your information system. Documenting an incident. You need to document the incidents. You need to make it a blueprint. And then incident containment strategies. The essential task of IR is to stop the incidents and contain its scope or impact. And lastly, you can react by incident escalation. Each organization will have to determine during the business impact analysis the point at which the incident becomes a disaster. So this is the example of how they will inform any incident happen at the organization. Certain organizations include the detail or information about incident or disaster on the website. For example, here is the use of Preparis portal in crisis management or incident response communication. It was featured on Fox News under the coverage of Hurricane Irma in September 2017. So this is another example. By alerting the message, create an incident notification message auto-generates an alert message by email, phone recording or text message, and then opens the incident management or tracking function. So people will keep on getting the information about the latest news on the disaster. Next, recovering from incidents. So when the disaster or incident happen, we need to straight away go into the recovery phase. As in incident reaction phase, the first task is to inform the appropriate human resources. The CSIRT must assess the full extent of the damage so as to determine what must be done to restore the system. CSIRT is stand for Computer System Incident Response Team. The immediate determination of the scope of the breach of confidentiality, integrity and availability of information and information assets is called incident damage assessment. The incident recovery process include identify the vulnerability that allow the incident to occur and spread and resolve them, and then address the safeguards that fail to stop or limit the incident, evaluate monitoring capabilities, restore the data from backups as needed, restore the services and processes in use, continuously monitor the system, it is very important, and lastly, restore the confidence of the communities of interest. Before returning to its routine duties, the CSIRT must conduct an after-action review. This after-action review is an opportunity for everyone who was involved in an incident or disaster to sit down and discuss what happened. But basically, there are some mistakes that made by CSIRT in incident response. According to McAfee, CSIRT commonly fail to appoint a clear chain of command with a specified individual in charge, establish a central operations center, knowing their enemy, they don't know who are they dealing with, develop a comprehensive IR plan with containment strategies, record IR activities at all phases, document the events as they occur in a timeline, distinguish incident containment from incident remediation, secure and monitor networks and network devices, establish and manage system and network logging, and also establish and support effective antivirus and anti-malware solutions. These are the NIST recommendations for incident handling, which include acquired tools and resources that may be of value during incident handling, and also prevent incidents from occurring by ensuring that network systems and applications are sufficiently secure, and other recommendations that you can read on by your own. Next, organizational philosophy on incident and disaster handling. Basically, there are two ways to handle, which is protect and forget, or patch and proceed, and also apprehend and prosecute, or pursue and prosecute. In protect and forget, this approach focuses on the defense of data and the system that house, use and transmit it. An investigation that makes this approach focus on the detection and analysis of events to determine how they happen and to prevent reoccurrence. Whereas apprehend and prosecute approach focuses on the identification and apprehension of a responsible individual, with additional attention paid to the collection and preservation of potential evidentiary material that might support administrative or criminal prosecution. Next is disaster recovery. Disaster recovery planning entails preparation for and recovery from a disaster, whether natural or man-made. In general, an incident is a disaster when the organization is unable to contain or control the impact of an incident, or the level of damage or destruction from an incident is so severe the organization is unable to quickly recover. As you learned earlier, the CP teams creates the DR planning team. Some common DR planning team, some common disaster recovery response teams include disaster recovery management, communication, computer recovery team, system recovery, network recovery team, and so on. In disaster recovery process, the NIST methodology can be adapted for DRP, which is organize the DR team, develop the DR planning policy statement, review the BIA, identify preventive controls, create DR strategies, develop the DR plan document, ensure DR plan testing, training and exercises, and also ensure DR plan maintenance. The DR team, led by the manager designated as the DR team leader, begins with the development of the DR policy soon after the team is formed. The DR policy contains the following key elements: purpose, scope, roles and responsibility of the team, resource requirements, training requirements, exercise and testing schedules, plan maintenance schedule, and lastly, special considerations. A DR plan can classify disaster in a number of ways, including natural disaster and man-made disaster. It also can be classified by speed of development, either rapid onset disaster. Example of natural disaster is fire, flood, earthquake, lightning, landslide or mudslide, tornado, hurricane, tsunami, and dust contamination. Man-made disaster is purposely made by a human, for example like hackers. Rapid onset disaster means that they occur suddenly with little warning. Without any warning, it happened. Basically, this kind of disaster might taking people's life and destroying the means of production because we did not aware of that things will be happen. Whereas low onset build up gradually over time before they can degrade the operation of the organization to withstand their effect. Lama-lama baru perasan yang dia dah rosak. When you want to plan to recover the disaster, the scenario development and impact analysis are used to categorize the level of threat of each potential disaster. The key points in the DR plan to recovery is clear delegation of roles and responsibility, execution of the alert roster and notification of key personnel, clear establishment of priorities, documentation of the disaster, action steps to mitigate the impact, and also alternative implementation for the various systems components. These are the simple DR plan elements. If you want to plan for the disaster recovery, These are the things that you need to have: name of agency, date of completion or update of the plan and date of the most recent test, agency staff to be called in the event of a disaster, emergency services to be called in event of a disaster, locations of in-house emergency equipment and supplies, sources of off-site equipment and supplies, salvage, priority release, agency disaster recovery procedures, and also follow-up assessment. Next is business continuity. How are you going to make sure that your business can keep on continued after the disaster? The most important thing is by having a business continuity planning. Disaster have such a profound effects on the organization that it cannot continue operations at its primary site until it fully completes all DR efforts, which requires business continuity strategies. The business continuity policy include purpose, scope, roles and responsibility, resource requirements, training requirements, exercise and test schedules, plant maintenance schedule, and also special considerations. Continuity strategies involve exclusive use options, shared use option, and also specialized option. In general, there are 3 types of usage strategy in which the organization has the right to the exclusive use of a facility and access is not shared with other organizations, which is hot sites, warm sites, and also cold sites. Hot site is a fully configured computing facility that includes all services, communication links, and physical plant operation. Warm site provide many of the same services and options as the hot site, but typically software applications are not included or are not installed and configured. Whereas cold site provides only rudimentary services and facility. No computer hardware or peripherals are provided. For shared use options, they have timeshare, service bureaus, and mutual agreement. A timeshare operates like one of 3 sites described previously, but is leased in conjunction with a business partner or sister organization. Whereas a service bureau is a service agency that provides a service for a fee. So this agency or company will help you manage your website. Such agencies also frequently provide off-site data storage for a fee as well. The last type of shared use option is mutual agreement, which is a contract between 2 organizations in which each party agrees to assist to other in the event of a disaster. And lastly, specialized option focus on rolling mobile site and also externally stored or pre-proposition resources. As indicated earlier, the IR plan focuses on immediate response, but if the incident escalates into a disaster, the IR plan may give way to the DR plan and BC plan as illustrated in figure 10-12. This situation might happen in 2 events. Either the attack occurs into the incident. Incident means that the ransomware attack on a single system or user only attack one user or one computer. Whereas a disaster means that the ransomware attack on all organization system or user. So not only one user in the attack, but almost all people involved. So it can be called as disaster. Disaster recovery and business continuity planning. When the organizational disaster occur, straight away the staff implement the DR or BC plans. BC plans relocates organization to certain location, and then they will make use of alternate site. They will use other place because the current place is already in disaster. And then DR plan works to re-establish operations at the new primary site. So this is the contingency planning implementation timeline, starting from the disaster, the day of the incident, until the end of the crisis. Next is crisis management. Another process that many organizations plan for separately is crisis management, which focuses more on the effects that a disaster has on people than its effects on information assets. While some organizations include crisis management as a subset of DR plan, the protection of human life and the organization's image is such a high priority that it may deserve its own committee, policy, and plan. According to Gartner research, the crisis management team is responsible for managing the event from an enterprise perspective and performs the following roles: support personnel and their loved ones during the crisis. It is more on supporting the mental health of the people affected with the incident, keeping the public informed about the event and the actions being taken to ensure the recovery of personnel and the enterprise, to minimize the feeling of panic to the panic from the public. Communicating with major customers, suppliers, partners, regulatory agencies, industry organizations, the media, and other interested parties. The crisis management planning team should establish a base of operation or command center near the site of the disaster as soon as possible in order to make sure that they can easily reach the place if any latest news or latest event occur. The CMPT should include individuals from all functional areas of the organization in order to facilitate the communication and cooperation. Usually, the CMPT is charged with three primary responsibilities, which is verifying personnel status, activating the alert roster, and also coordinating with emergency services. Next is business resumption. Because the DR and BC plans are closely related, most organizations merge the two functions into a single function called business resumption planning, BRP. Such a comprehensive plan must be able to support the re-establishment of operation at two different locations, one immediately at an alternate site and one eventually back at the primary site. The last one, testing contingency plan. Very few plans are executable as initially written. Instead, they must be tested to identify vulnerabilities, faults, and inefficient processes. There are four types of testing strategy that can be used to test contingency plans, which is a desk check, structured walkthrough, simulation, and full interruption. Desk check is the simplest kind of validation, involves distributing copies of the appropriate plans to all individuals who will be assigned roles during an actual incident or disaster. Structured, all involved individuals walk through the steps they would take during an actual incident or disaster. Whereas simulation, the organization creates a role-playing exercise in which the CP team is presented with a scenario of an actual incident or disaster and expected to react if it had occurred. And lastly, full interruption. The individual follow each and every IR, DR, BC procedure, including the interruption of service, restoration of data from backups, and notification of appropriate individuals. Testing contingency is very important because for the actual incident or disaster happen, people involved in this contingency plan need to make sure that they are fully prepared and they know how to react if the real thing happen. Okay, and they need to make sure that they are following the same thing, the same process, the same phase in what they have planned. Final thoughts on contingency planning. As in all organizational efforts, iteration results in improvement. A formal implementation of this methodology is a process known as continuous process improvement, like what you have learned in business process subject last semester. Each time the plan is rehearsed, it should be improved. That's why you need to always do rehearsal. Contoh macam kalau you tengok bomber, dia selalu buat sesi kebakaran. Walaupun kebakaran tu bukan betul-betul pun, tapi dia kena buat simulasi tu in order to make sure that if the same thing happen, they know how to react. And constant evaluation and improvement leads to an improved outcome. Alright, so that's the end of chapter 9. So I see you guys in the last chapter, chapter 10. Thank you so much and take care. Assalamualaikum.